One of the books in the Old Testament is called the Book of Jonah. Jehovah, God of Israel, told Jonah to go to Nineveh and cry against it, because their wickedness has come up before him. Jonah arose, went down to Joppa, and from Joppa he sailed to Tarshish. Jehovah, God of Israel, heard a great wind on the sea, and there was a great storm on the sea, so that the ship was about to break up. Jonah remained calm and slept, while the sailors became afraid, and every man cried to his God, and they threw the cargo which was in the ship into the sea, to lighten it for them. The captain approached Jonah and made him call on his God, hoping he would save them. The sailors cast lots to find out who was to be blamed for this misfortune, and the lot fell on Jonah. They asked him where he was from, so he answered, "I am a Hebrew, and I fear the Lord God of heaven, who made the sea and the dry land." Jonah told them to pick him and throw him into the sea, because he was guilty, since he was fleeing from the presence of Jehovah, God of Israel. The sailors threw Jonah into the sea, calling on Jehovah, God of Israel, saying, "We earnestly pray, O Lord, do not let us perish on account of this man's life, and do not put innocent blood on us, for you, O Lord, have done as you have pleased." The sea stopped its raging, and Jehovah, God of Israel, appointed a great fish to swallow Jonah, and Jonah was in the stomach of the fish 3 days and 3 nights, where he prayed. After 3 days, Jehovah, God of Israel, commanded the fish, and it vomited Jonah up unto the dry land. Thomas Doane, the author of Bible myths and their parallels in other religions, says in his book there is a Hindu fable about a man Saktideva who was swallowed by a huge fish. The story goes, Saktideva, wishing to marry the princess of Vardhahamapura, embarks upon a journey to discover the Golden City, to win her hand in marriage. During this adventure, Saktideva is devoured by a giant fish before being eventually freed unharmed. There is a similar, but only in some way, story told by an ancient Greek historian Herodotus in his book Histories. Arion sailed from Corinth to Sicily to sing in a singing contest there. Because Arion was such a great singer, he won all the singing contests and got tons of prizes. He had heaps of gold and jewels. When the contest was over, Arion got on a ship with all his prizes to go home to Corinth. But once they were out of sight of shore, the sailors on the ship decided to steal Arion's gold and jewels. Arion begged the sailors to just take his prizes and let him leave, but they thought it was too dangerous to let him leave. He might tell on them when he got home, so Arion asked the sailors to let him just sing one last song before he jumped into the ocean, and they agreed to let him sing one last song. As the last notes of his song were dying away, Arion jumped into the water with his lyre, but a family of dolphins had been listening to Arion's beautiful song. Just as Arion was drowning, the dolphin swam over and picked him up. Arion rowed all the way back to Corinth on the back of a dolphin. When he got there, he told the tyrant Periander what had happened. Periander waited for the sailors to get to Corinth. Then he arrested them and got all the gold and jewels back. Hercules, or Hercules, a hero of Greek and Roman mythology, fought a sea monster from the inside. The story about Hercules goes, Hesione was the daughter of King Laomedon of Troy. Hercules met Hesione after his year of enslavement to Omphale, when he set out for Troy. Hercules found Troy in a state of crisis, as King Laomedon had cheated Poseidon and Apollo by failing to pay them for building the walls. For punishment, Poseidon had sent a large sea monster, who would only be appeased by devouring the princess Hesione. Hercules sought to kill the monster, and naturally expected a reward, such as Laomedon's amazing horses. Hercules bravely killed the beast by allowing himself to be swallowed by the monster, whom he then killed from the inside. But once a cheat, always a cheat. Laomedon schemed on paying Hercules too. Some sources say that Hercules stayed inside the sea monster for 3 days. It can be found in Mazzaroth, or the constellations, by F. Rolleston. Even Jesus Christ mentioned Jonah in the Gospel of Matthew. Then certain of the scribes and of the Pharisees answered, saying, Master, we would see a sign from thee. But he answered and said unto them, An evil and adulterous generation seeketh after a sign, and there shall be no sign be given to it, but the sign of the prophet Jonah. For as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the whale's belly, so shall the Son of Man be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. The men of Nineveh shall rise in judgment with this generation, and shall condemn it, because they repented at the preaching of Jonah, and behold, a greater than Jonah is here. The queen of the south shall rise up in the judgment with this generation, and shall condemn it, for she came from the uttermost parts of the earth to hear the wisdom of Solomon, and behold, a greater than Solomon is here. What caught my attention is, for as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the whale's belly, so shall the Son of Man be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. Because scholars universally admitted the story is just an allegory, the significance of which is the alternate swelling up and casting forth of day or the sun by night. But why 3 days? It can be easily explained by science, especially by an intriguing article on notcliff.com. The sun will die at midnight on December 21, but don't panic. It will rebirth on midnight December 24th. This occurs at the beginning of winter every year for the past 4.6 billion years. It is called the winter solstice. Sun stood still and is considered the shortest day in the year in terms of hours of sunlight. It is a 3-day period when the hours of daylight are at its shortest and the hours of night darkness are in its longest. Noticeably, the sun progressively sets earlier each evening after June 22nd, the summer solstice, longest hours of sunlight, and nightfall comes the earliest on December 21st. Hence daylight savings time puts our clock 1 hour back to make up for the shorter hours of daylight. Mr. Doane in his book says, in regard to these heroes remaining 3 days and 3 nights in the bowels of the fish, they represent the sun at the winter solstice, from December 22nd to the 25th, that is for 3 days and 3 nights, the sun remains in the lowest regions, in the bowels of the earth, in the belly of the fish. It is then cast forth and renews its career. This is why I don't think that Jesus Christ said, for as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the whale's belly, so shall the Son of Man be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth, for absolutely no reason. Jesus Christ, according to the New Testament, rose from the dead on the 3rd day. Mr. Doane in his book Bible Myths and Their Parallels in Other Religions mentions Vedas, the 4 sacred books of the Hindus, and in the Vedas, when day and night, sun and darkness, are opposed to each other, the one is designated red, the other black. I tried to look for this in Vedas on sacred text, found only this in the introduction to Vedas. The goddess of dawn is addressed in about 20 hymns. The personification is but slight, the physical phenomenon always being present to the mind of the poet. Decked in gay attire, like a dancer, clothed in light, she appears in the east and unveils her charms. Rising, resplendent, as from a bath, she comes with light, driving away the darkness and removing the black robe of night. Black robe of night and Rig Veda in the 6th book in hymn 3 mentions Agni, the god of fire. Even though he is the god of fire, various forms of fire are associated with Agni and include the sun, lightning, comets, sacrificial fire, domestic fires, the fire of the funeral pyre, and the digestive fire, which is within all humans. The Little Red Riding Hood is a story of a girl in a red cloak, sun, devoured by a wolf night, but comes out unhurt. Professor Max Müller, a German philologist and Orientalist, in speaking of the comparison of the different forms of Aryan religion and mythology in India, Persia, Greece, Italy and Germany says, in each of these nations there was a tendency to change the original conception of divine powers, to misunderstand the many names given to these powers, and to misinterpret the praises addressed to them. In this manner, some of the divine names were changed into half-divine, half-human heroes, and at last, the myths, which were true and intelligible, as told originally of the sun or the dawn or the storms, were turned into legends or fables, too marvelous to be believed of common mortals. This process can be watched in India, in Greece and in Germany. The same story, or nearly the same, is told of gods, of heroes and of men. The divine myth became an heroic legend, and the heroic legend fades away into a nursery tale. Our nursery tales have well been called the modern patois of the ancient sacred mythology of the Aryan race. The author of the Bible Myths and Their Parallels in Other Religions, Thomas Doane, believes that other myths are interwoven in here. He means the Indian fish, avatar of Vishnu, or the Chaldean Oannes. Even the Philistines had their own god, fish god, Dagon, who was mentioned in the Bible several times. Then the lords of the Philistines gathered them together for to offer a great sacrifice unto Dagon their god, and to rejoice. For they said, Our God hath delivered Samson, our enemy, into our hand. Oannes, Dagon, and Vishnu were depicted as a fish. Oannes, in Mesopotamian mythology, was an amphibious being who taught mankind wisdom. He appeared out of the ocean every day as a fish-human creature and shared his wisdom with the people. At night he returned to the sea. Berossus, a Babylonian priest, described Oannes. He taught them the use of letters, sciences, and arts of all kinds. He taught them to construct cities, to found temples, to compile laws, and explain to them the principles of geometrical knowledge. He made them distinguish the seeds of the earth and show them how to collect the fruits. In short, he instructed them in everything which could tend to soften human manners and humanize their laws. From that time, nothing material has been added by way of improvement to his instructions. And when the sun set, this being, Oannes, retired again into the sea, for he was amphibious. The national god of the Philistines, Dagon, was also portrayed with the upper body of a man and the lower body of a fish. Atargatis was a fish-tailed goddess of water and the moon, worshipped in northern Syria. Mr. Doane's book says she is simply a personification of the moon who follows the course of the sun. According to the evidence, biblical Jonah is merely a personification of the sun. Jonah, Dagon, Atargatis, and Vishnu came out of the sea and are benefactors of mankind. It's worth mentioning that the fish avatar of Vishnu has 4 arms, which evidently means he is the god of the whole world. 4 arms might be the symbol of 4 corners of the world.
A gem that I recently met. Of course, we don't literally believe the story of Jonah and the whale, but it is symbolic of Jesus' death and resurrection. Suppose science worked like that.